The year is 1948. A tiny corner of the world, known for centuries as Palestine, is about to change forever. This land, held sacred by Jews, Christians and Muslims, became the center of a storm. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War was not just a battle over land. It was a clash of dreams, of identities and of futures. For one group it was the birth of a long-awaited nation. For another it was a catastrophe, a loss of home and history. To understand our world today on July 20th, 2025, we must look back at this pivotal moment. It is a story of hope and despair, woven together in the fabric of history. So who were the players in this dramatic story? On one side we have the Jewish people. Many were survivors of the Holocaust in Europe, a terrible event that took millions of lives. They dreamed of a safe homeland, a place where they could finally be secure. This dream was called Zionism. They wanted to create a Jewish state in the land they considered their ancient home. Their goal was simple: to build a nation called Israel. They believed this was their historical right, a return to the land of their ancestors after thousands of years of exile and persecution. On the other side were the Palestinian Arabs. They had lived on this land for many generations. They saw it as their home, their country. They also dreamed of their own independent nation. They were joined by neighboring Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. These nations saw the creation of a Jewish state in their midst as a threat. They wanted to prevent it from happening and protect the rights and lands of the Palestinian Arabs. Their goal was to keep Palestine as an Arab land, as it had been for centuries. The stage for this conflict was set by a decision made far away. After World War II, Great Britain, which had been ruling Palestine, decided to leave. They handed the problem over to a new global organization, the United Nations. The UN came up with a plan. It was called the Partition Plan of 1947. The idea was to divide Palestine into two separate states. One would be for the Jewish people, and the other for the Arab people. The city of Jerusalem, holy to so many, would be an international city, belonging to no one side. The Jewish leaders accepted this plan, but the Arab leaders rejected it entirely. The United Nations plan was a turning point. For the Jewish community in Palestine, it was a green light. They began to organize and prepare for statehood. They had a well-trained, if small, military force called the Haganah. But for the Palestinian Arabs and their allies, the plan was an injustice. They felt their land was being given away without their consent. Even before the British officially left, fighting broke out between Jewish and Arab militias across Palestine. Small towns and villages became battlegrounds, roads were blocked, and communities were cut off. It was a chaotic and violent time, a civil war before the larger war even began. The final day of British rule was May 14, 1948. On that very day, the leader of the Jewish community, David Ben-Gurion, stood before a crowd in Tel Aviv. He read a document that would change the course of history. He declared the establishment of the State of Israel. For Jewish people around the world, it was a moment of immense joy and celebration. After 2,000 years, they had a nation to call their own. But this declaration was also a trigger. It was the moment the simmering conflict exploded into a full-scale international war, a war for the very survival of the new state. The very next day, the armies of 5 Arab nations crossed the borders into the former territory of Palestine. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq joined the fight against the newly declared Israel. They were determined to crush the infant state before it could take root. The war had officially begun. The world watched as this small new country with a population of only about 600,000 Jewish people faced the combined might of its neighbors. The odds seemed stacked against Israel. The question on everyone's mind was simple: could it survive this onslaught? The early days of the war were desperate for Israel. The Arab armies had more soldiers, more tanks, and more planes. They pushed into Israeli territory from the north, south, and east. The Egyptian army advanced from the Sinai Desert towards Tel Aviv. The Jordanian army, known as the Arab Legion and considered the best trained, surrounded and laid siege to the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem's Old City. Syrian forces attacked from the Golan Heights. It seemed as if the dream of Israel might be extinguished just as it was born. The fighting was intense, and every town and settlement became a fortress to be defended. War is never just about armies and borders, it is about people. And for the people living in Palestine, the war was a tragedy of immense proportions. As the fighting spread, a massive refugee crisis began. Over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs fled, or were forced to leave their homes. They left behind their houses, their farms, and their entire way of life. This event is known to Palestinians as the Nakba, which means the catastrophe. They ended up in refugee camps in neighboring Arab countries like Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, as well as in parts of Palestine like the West Bank and Gaza. They expected to return home soon, but most never would. At the same time, Jewish communities in Arab countries also faced a difficult future. For centuries, Jews had lived in cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus, but with the creation of Israel and the ensuing war, they faced growing hostility and persecution. In the years that followed the war, hundreds of thousands of these Jews were forced to leave their homes. They left behind their history and possessions. Most of them found a new home in the young state of Israel, becoming citizens of the nation that had been created in part to give them refuge from such dangers. Their story is another side of the massive population shift caused by the conflict. During the war, there were key moments that turned the tide. One of the most important was a series of truces organized by the United Nations. These temporary breaks in the fighting were meant to give diplomats a chance to find peace, but both sides used the time to rearm and regroup. Israel was particularly successful at this. They secretly bought weapons including planes and tanks from other countries, especially from Czechoslovakia. They also organized their different fighting groups into a single unified army, the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF. This allowed them to become a much more effective fighting force when the battles resumed. When the fighting started again, the newly strengthened Israeli forces went on the offensive. They managed to push back the Arab armies on multiple fronts. They broke the siege of Jerusalem, securing a corridor to the city. They captured more territory than what the original UN partition plan had given them. This included areas like the Galilee in the north and the Negev desert in the south. The momentum of the war had shifted dramatically. The Arab armies, which had seemed so powerful at the start, were now on the defensive, struggling to hold their ground against a determined and better organized Israeli military. By the beginning of 1949, the fighting began to wind down. The Arab nations, facing military defeats and internal problems, agreed to talk. But they would not sign a final peace treaty with Israel, because that would mean recognizing its existence. Instead, they signed a series of armistice agreements. These were not peace deals but long-term ceasefire agreements. The agreements were signed separately between Israel and its neighbors, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. These agreements drew new temporary borders which became known as the Green Line. These were the lines that would define the map of the region for the next 2 decades. The war redrew the map of the Middle East. Israel survived and now controlled about 78% of the land of former Mandatory Palestine, much more than the 56% proposed by the UN plan. The land that was supposed to be for an Arab state was divided. The Kingdom of Jordan took control of the area known as the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and its holy sites. Egypt took control of a small strip of land along the coast called the Gaza Strip. The independent Palestinian Arab state that the UN had envisioned never came to be. The dream of one nation was realized, while the dream of another was shattered. The most lasting consequence of the war was the human one. The Palestinian refugee problem became a permanent feature of the region. Generations of Palestinians have grown up in refugee camps, still dreaming of returning to the homes their families lost. Their fate remains one of the most difficult and emotional issues in the ongoing conflict. For Israel, the war cemented its existence but left it surrounded by hostile neighbors. The state was born in conflict, and the need for security and defense would shape its society and politics for all the years to come, right up to this day. Today, in 2025, the echoes of the 1948 war are still all around us. The core issues of that conflict, borders, the status of Jerusalem, and the fate of Palestinian refugees, remain unresolved. The Green Line drawn in 1949 is still a central point of discussion in peace talks. The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians continues to shape not just their own lives, but global politics as well. To understand the headlines we read today, we must first understand the story of 1948. It is a story that began over 75 years ago, but in many ways, it has never ended.